How's everyone doing today? Give me a thumbs up. Doing okay? Thumbs down is like, I only have about 15 minutes and then I gotta go to sleep. I'm glad that nobody is thumbs upping or thumbs downing it. Welcome everyone. Emily and I, Lux, are going to lead us through a couple hours of some acro. It's phenomenal to see so many people practicing at the same time in the same space all together. Thank you so much for being here with us. There's a few things that I want to cover from a ground rules perspective. For those of you that have been doing these with us already, you have a bit of a rundown for them. I'm just going to repeat it again for those of us with short-term memory issues where marijuana is legal, and for those of us that are new that just don't have that information yet. I'd like us to be very aware of what our surroundings are. Some of us may have hard objects with sharp corners that are near us. You might be near the edge of a wall. You may have a ball, a bolster, a water bottle, anything that you could come down onto on the way to the ground. I want you to just clear your space and make it so that you don't have anything that's obstructing your path to the ground. On top of that, many of us are working without spotters. Almost all of us are working without spotters here. So if you are fortunate enough to be working with a spotter, you have the luxury of being able to try some things that are a bit more out of balance. That if you don't have a spotter, we want you to all agree to be very conservative with whatever variations you take tonight. So if there's something that feels like, maybe tonight should just mean not yet. Let's save that for when we have a spotter, and let's not take that variation at the risk of injury. And if it feels like, okay, we are calibrated with each other, not like Emily has this experience individually, Lux has this experience individually, like maybe we can do it together. If you have the experience that you feel comfortable doing it together, go for it. If you don't, then please work on a progression toward whatever it is we're working on. Give me a thumbs up. Fair? Yes? Agreed? We get an agreement? Get a yes, yes, yes. I see Portland's not so into that. I mean, B, yes. But if I could get Janae and Sam and them, yes, you agree? Give me a thumbs up. All right, cool. Yeah, yeah. Pretend like you're paying attention, please. Yes, thank you, thank you. Communication is strange. It's weird to not hear you breathe. I'm used to not hearing you breathe in class, but it's strange to not hear you breathe when we're not in class over this barrier where we can't actually hear all of each other. So there's this ability to try and connection through this medium that feels a little bit disconnected is always really interesting. So I want to remind everyone to, number one, breathe. But number two, that if you have a question, there's a couple of ways to get us. Number one is to not have too many people speaking at the same time. If you would like to ask a question or get our attention, do this. Just put your hand right over the camera. It's so distracting to my screen that we'll see you and then we'll call on you. So everyone give it a practice. Let me see your hand over your camera. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Of course, Portland, yeah. Good effort there, Janae. I'm glad you actually got up to try that. So that's really great. That's a way that we can identify you and then address whatever question you have. If you have a question, you need to unmute yourself in order to ask it, and you may have to just delay your question by a split second. And you can unmute yourself by simply just hitting the space bar on your computer. It will temporarily unmute you. And then you can mute, and then when you take your hand off the space bar, you'll just be muted again. So that's a nice, easy way to navigate that. Anything else?
Are we going to say people's names when they're ready?
We will attempt to say your name when we're addressing you. So like if you cover the screen so that the rest of the people that are listening will know who we're talking to. Generally speaking, if we're like, straighten your legs, bend your arm more, and you're like, well, my arm is like already bent, you don't want it bent more, yeah, we're not talking to you. You can figure out if these things might also be helpful for you to employ as we're going through whatever diagnosis we're giving an individual. But then also we will attempt to address the specific individual. And do want to also take a moment to remind and encourage everyone to make sure that we're still practicing really strong techniques in communication. So these are inquisitive, not directive. So we're asking, is there anything I can modify for you to make this better, rather than just barking our demands at our partners, particularly if things are not working well. I want us to have a very light heart about all of this, and if it's not working and we're just frustrating ourselves into the ground, I want us to just take a moment, take a breath, have a smile together, and say, it's not that big a deal. Let's work on this progression in a way that is not so taxing on us, and then go back into it. Yeah.
Especially if you've been confined in the same space together for long periods of time.
Right, right. You're like, I see New Yorkers pulling their hair out over this. Yes, yes. Yeah. You're gonna have to go somewhere lower and get a good grip. Any questions before we start? Great. Just so I think we're just about all here. And can there's a couple people that I'm not positive can hear me. Can I have a thumbs up from everyone that can hear me? Great. And then the only people that are not answering are already doing acro, and I'm just going to assume that they can hear me, and if not, all right, they can. Excellent. So we're going to start off with a couple of exercises just to get a little bit of range of motion and a little bit of heat generated in our body. If you have not done anything to warm yourselves up first and you're feeling cold, please, before you work in partnership, make sure that you as an individual are calibrated, ready, and heated enough to participate in this. We're going to start off with just some plank walks. Our plank walks will do some leg swims. So we'll look a little something like this. With a reverse hand-to-hand grip and straight arms from the base and flyer, we're going to walk down the legs of the flyer. We'll come to the ankles. We're going to let the legs go wide. Flyer's going to come into a tuck and then straight out again. We'll do that a few times. And then we'll walk back to our front plank. In our front plank, we're going to go through a range of motion where we'll bend and extend. And we'll rotate. And we can do those together, where we bend, extend, and rotate. And then we'll also do a side star range of motion, where we'll come into a side star. I'm going to bring a foot to the top of the flyer, to the bottom shoulder of the flyer, and that's going to help get a little more internal rotation of the leg that's balancing. For the external rotation, I can get a hook on the calf with my foot and help give myself a little more external rotation. I can also use my hand and a foot to hand to get a little more external rotation. So we can play with those in our side stars. So walk the plank, front plank range of motion, and side star range of motion. Make sense? If you have a question, cover up your camera.
Oh, we got some claps. Okay.
And go. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a tightness exercise for largely flyers. We're going to look at going from a back plank to a star without changing the shape of the flyer's body. We're going to try to keep the flyer's body straight the entire time. A little bit hollow is okay, but straight, trying not to let any back bend come in. And the method that we're going to use to achieve this is the flyers are going to keep their eyes on their toes the entire time. As long as you can see your toes and your hips, because if you just look at your toes and you can't see your hips, you're likely too piked. But if you can see your toes and your hips, then you can be in one line. If you can't see your toes, that means that the hips are too far forward. And so get yourself into a shape where you can see your hips and your toes, one straight line, and we're going to shift from the back plank to star there. So from back plank, the flyer brings the hands by their ears, base will bend until we reach the hands. I'm going to take one foot and I'm going to turn it 90 degrees across the sacrum. And the second foot is going to come to the shoulder. That foot bends as the foot that's on the sacrum extends, bring the flyer into the inversion. And then with most of the weight in the shoulder to foot connection, we go to extension. Second foot comes to the shoulder. First foot can come off. I'm going to externally rotate it as I bring it to the sacrum. As we come back, the second foot reaches the hip as the first foot turns parallel. The feet are parallel to each other, back in our back plank position to the ground. A relatively straightforward transition that we just want to have everyone practice the tightness exercise element of it. So do that, I don't know, I'd say about 200,000 times. Sound good? Excellent. I only saw one person roll their eyes. That's not so bad. So 3, 2. From there, we're going to do similar exercise that we did last week, where we're moving similar to our 4-step, where we're going to go from our star. We're going to connect a shin to foot and try to bring our flyer to the ground by our hips, by the base's hips, and then we're going to reverse all of that. The thing that we want to really focus on here is how we can use the legs to help the flyer come into the inversion and come into an upright position. And so not only the leg that is receiving, but the leg that is delivering are the two things that I want us to focus on equally as we're moving through this. So not just the one that is receiving, not just the new leg, but the one that is delivering, the older leg, the one that is getting out of the equation, is important. We want to make sure that that one doesn't abandon our flyer too soon. We'll start off in a star. In that star, flyer will bring shin to foot. And then the foot that's on the shoulder is going to extend while the foot that's on the shin bends. Flyer brings their foot to the ground, and then we reverse that. The foot that's on the shin extends as the foot that's on the shoulder bends all the way back up. One more time. Looking at getting the articulation upright, the articulation into the inversion. From there, if you want, you can also go into a back bend flyers, and we can touch a reverse foot to foot behind the flyer's back. Basis, you might have to turn and look around the shoulder of the flyer to see that foot. Cool.
I have a question. I'm kind of new. So as the base, when you guys are going into the one foot on the shin, does your foot go really midline, or does it stay out? Is my foot supposed to come in midline? Like,
it stays pretty midline. Your foot is coming essentially between my legs.
But I guess the foot that's supporting me, if it's also midline, is it just a tight squeeze for both?
Yeah, I mean, because, well, we have a foot that is blocking the shin on one side and an arm on the other, and so the foot of the flyer is coming between those 2 points.
Yeah, okay, so your foot as the base is shifting inward. Or is it
my foot as a base is staying in line with my torso. It's not coming out to the side. Am I missing your question? I'm missing your question.
Can you turn the other way with your head is like towards me, maybe? Okay.
Right, so if we're here, we got the shin that comes down, and then the foot comes down between my legs.
Okay, gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
Quick add-on question. If you were to go all the way to the ground, would you have to, that foot that's on the shin, would you have to push that towards your butt, or do you?
So we're going to look at some shoulder stand stuff. Basic grips for shoulder stand. Will you sit with your back to the camera? All right. So what we're going to look at is our placement of the hands on the shoulders. I like to go really wide with my fingers so that I have the ability to give good pressure through the tips, or sorry, not through the tips, but the pads of the fingers. and be able to apply pressure there. And if I'm narrow, I don't quite have the same amount of influence on the leverage of shifting the flyer as I do with my fingers wide. So with my fingers wide, I feel like I have a much better purchase on that. From the side, I'm not attempting to have my hands too close to the front of the shoulders, because then my wrists get hyperextended when we come into an inversion. So instead, I try to have my hands much closer to the back, where I'm right along the top crest and just slightly back from there. And that's where I will have not the same hyperextension in the wrists when we come into the inversion. As we're looking at our shoulder stands, we do change our technique a bit if we're going from a shoulder stand to a monolimb shoulder stand. And for a monolimb shoulder stand, my grip is a good bit closer. My thumbs are even touching the spine, or my index fingers might be touching the spine, and then I'll kind of take them and just move them off the spine, but they should be close enough that they can even touch each other at that point. If I'm going to balance just on one side, I want to be close enough to the midline so that this isn't a huge cantilever all the way out on the shoulder. So I'm going to be nice and close to the center of the flyer for a monolimb shoulder stand. Now, we're not really worried too much about monolimb shoulder stands, but we are going to be shifting weight toward monolimb shoulder stands. So the grip that I want us to take in our shoulder stand is going to be this narrow one, rather than something that we would more traditionally do. We're going to come and do a nice narrow shoulder stand so that we can make some shifts, lighten up the grip on one side, shift there, lighten up the grip on the other side. All right? So what that looks like might be a big shift. That big shift might be enough that we even become a little bit free with that hand. Let's try that again. And then we can play on the other side. And this side, we're only getting our fingers a little bit lighter. The weight's not coming all the way off, but we're maybe only 5% of the weight on the one side, 95% on the other side. And what we're attempting to do here is we're not going to take an arm away from the flyer. We're just going to give a post, and the flyer is going to try to lift away from the opposite hand. So my hand stays there. I open up my grip, and the flyer might lift away from it and might not. Doesn't matter if they do or don't. But that's the technique we're going to try to use. Come down. So just that. Yeah, B.
You do this cool thing with your legs as you're basing?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that.
More? Okay, great. Love
yeah.
it.
But that's all we're seeking, is to see if we can have the flyer lift enough that it comes free on one side, lift enough that it comes free on the other side, not where we're like slumping down inside it and trying to get a balance where we're like, I hope this works, and we end up flat because we just pulled the carpet out from under our partner. What I'm doing with my leg that B was asking is that if I'm balancing on one side here, my arm is actually not quite strong enough to just do this by itself. And so I need a little bit of help. And so the way that I get the rest of the muscles on the side of my body to help reinforce the connection at the shoulder is I take my foot to the ground and I lift my hip, and I'm turning on all of the obliques and the transverse, and then that helps me access my lat, and then that helps stabilize my shoulder. And so just this lift of the hip gives me a lot of stability in my arm. Some of you aren't going to need it, won't make a difference to you at all, and you're just going to be like, no problem, I can hold with one arm. Some of you will lift a hip and it's like still not going to be enough. It's just my shoulder's not stable enough yet for it. But for those of us in the middle, like me, where it's like I'm not quite strong enough to do it without, but I am strong enough to do it with, lift a hip. It may help stabilize your shoulder. So that's a technique you can employ. One of the things that we're going to seek to do here is as a part of this, we want you to do some walkovers, because we're shifting to one side, and what I don't want to do is have a hand slip off a shoulder or a shoulder slip out of a hand and that can be a lethal fall going straight down. We want to have some idea of, if we're going into an inversion, do we have exit strategies? Do we know how to come out of this? And so I want to play with this, where we're going to do at least some walkovers. Our walkovers can be relatively straightforward, where we go from a front plank to a shoulder stand, and this one can be your regular shoulder stand grip if you want, or you can play with your narrow shoulder stand grip. And the flyer is going to do a walkover. The base is going to keep pushing through the arms the entire time. Flyers are going to come down one leg at a time, or both legs at the same time, whatever you're comfortable with. And as that gets comfortable, we want you to play also with being able to do a little bit of rotation and walk over. The other way. That was not a walkover, that was just a takedown. That was just coming down. So we're going to do a little bit of rotation and still come to the ground. And so to play with a little bit of range of motion so that we understand, yeah, the arms can support you. Yes, I can be comfortable going over, which will make me feel comfortable maybe coming in toward this monolimb balance. One of the things that is most likely going to be the challenge for flyers is going back far enough when we start to go into waiting on one side. When we start to wait on the one side, we tend to go a little bit into the front of the body and balance ourselves, flyers. But one of the things that's really advantageous is going back toward the base's finger pads a little bit more. It's the scarier side of the balance, but there is stability in it if we can cultivate it. So take some time, do some walkovers from your shoulder stand, and then take your narrow grip and start to shift side to side. That should take you a few minutes, so that'll give us an opportunity to answer questions, give you diagnosis. Give us a holler if you have questions, we'll answer. 3, 2, 1.
When I'm trying to fly Jessica in that, when she, just in the very beginning, when I'm trying to get her onto my hands, my legs are fully extended all the way to my tiptoes, and I still can't quite tip her onto my hands unless I really bend my arms.
Yeah.
And then I feel like then she's on me and my arms are bent, and then I have to straighten them, and it's fucking hard.
Yeah. It's called basing.
Fuck off.
But I mean, essentially that is the same technique that I use. I do bend my elbows a little bit to get underneath my flyer. The flyer can help by really extending through their heels and driving their heels into the inversion, but you do have to understand that if the flyer is going to take more initiative and do the heel drive into the inversion, you have to be very confident in the shoulder to hand connection. Know that that is stable if the flyer is going to be doing any of the driving of that transition. The base bending the elbows is a much more predictable connection to maintain. The flyer driving the heels does not have that same predictability of connection maintenance. Cool. But them's the methods. And then of course you can walk your feet up the torso of the flyer closer to the shoulder. You will shorten that distance and you won't have to bend the elbows as much, but you'll end up with a flyer that has feet closer to their ribs, which is, you know, a conversation to have. Yeah. All right. So we're going to take and rotate the shoulder stand to a back plank now. And in this shoulder stand to back plank, some of us just continue working on the shoulder stand and make some movements similar to what we did in our walkovers. And don't worry too much if you're going to continue to rotate if you feel like, oh, I've lost stability after a certain amount. It might not be right for you to continue this rotation. But for those of us that are going to continue to rotate this, what we're going to do is a couple of things. Is the bases at the shoulders, we're going to really find a lot of extension. The more extension we find, particularly as we rotate, we'll get more rotation out of more extension. If I were to plug the shoulders into the ground and try to rotate, I get limited and locked by my own torso. So I want to bypass that by finding the extension and then rotation. I may run out of rotation in my arms even with extension. I may only get a few, and I might not be able to get all the way around to the butt of the flyer to get to the back plank. So the flyer can rotate independently of that. And so we're going to do 2 exercises again. The first one is going to be that the base is going to just hold their arms steady, and the flyer is going to find some rotation and see if the rotation is as predicted working, or if it actually is a side bend that we think is a rotation. And then once we establish whether or not the flyer has the rotation, then the base is going to initiate, bring the rotation in. When the base runs out of rotation, the flyer can finish off whatever is needed. Let's work at this angle. So we come into our shoulder stand, and you can see here I do bend my elbows before I find the extension. I find extension and rotation. Oh, sorry, I lied. We'll go back to neutral, and the flyer is just going to find some extension, rotation. And you see how the hips move independent, the shoulders are staying where they are, and the flyer is just rotating at the hips. From there, I'll find extension. I'm going to find some rotation, and let's say this is as far as I can get. The flyer is going to do the rest of the rotation. I bring my feet up, and I keep my arms extending as I bend the knees so that the flyer stays in a straight body the whole time. Again? Yeah. This time, maybe I have more rotation, and I can rotate, 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 rotate. And again, keep the arms extending as the knees bend, coming into the back plank. A relatively straightforward rotation that is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. It is complicated. The flyer is rotating backwards behind them, blindly hoping that feet are there to catch them. It can be quite unnerving. The nice thing is that we have already practiced some walkovers, bases. Most important thing for you is don't let your flyer fall backwards without your feet up. Make sure that your feet are up. Help catch those hips. When you make contact, bend those knees to bring the flyer's hips into your center. Most dangerous thing here that I've ever seen someone attempt to do is base this with their knees bent up in the air, so that if the flyer were to come down, it would be right on top of the knee. That's a situation we don't want. Every base, make sure that you don't base with your knees in this position. You bring your legs up so that your feet can make contact. Make sense? All right. Questions? Give it a shot. Come on in if you have a question and give us an ask. 3, 2, 1. Right now we're going to go from the other direction. Rather than going from front plank, shoulder stand, back plank, we're going to go from reverse shoulders, so from back plank to a reverse shoulder stand to front plank. The issues that you were having with getting your throat cut off in the last one are going to be a bit of the opposite this time. Last time when you were coming into your back plank, you tucked your chin to not get your throat cut off. As we go into the front plank, you're going to do the opposite. You're actually going to really stick your neck out. You're going to showcase the underside of the neck. You're going to really open up the whole front side of the body so that this is catchable by the base. We want the hips to be nice and accessible and catchable, and the head is going to be a big part of making sure that the rest of the body gets open. First the head opens and then the rest of the body opens up. So back plank. To a reverse shoulder stand. And I'm going to bring my thumbs next to my fingers. I'm going to go a little bit wide here, not too wide, but just a little bit wide. And we do have some positive pressure in the front side of the pectorals. So flyers, we do want to put some pressure into the base's fingers here. I find the same extension, the same rotation, and then we just have to deal with the elbows of the flyer as the legs are going around them. And that's probably the most difficult part about this, is that there's a lot of conflict between the base's legs and the flyer's elbows that we need to navigate around. And it's really just this moment of patience that needs to happen during this rotation. We find this rotate, we find the balance, we find the extension, we find the rotation, and then this here becomes an obstacle that we need to navigate around. So the flyer wants to not bring the hips down too soon, but does want to start to really showcase the front of the hips to the base's feet. And Emily does a really good job of extending through her neck and head and really showcasing the front of the hips to the feet, knowing also with some landmarks around the room
we're at a diagonal here, but if we were normally doing this, we would be more square. And we would have the flyer mark that the feet are going to come down in this plane toward what you can't see is my window. And we would call it that way. We would say, make sure that the feet are facing to the window as we come down. The reason I use my thumbs next to my fingers is that I get more rotation if my thumbs aren't blocking that rotation. The head extends, the hips come down, I continue to extend through the arms, bend the knees. Of the two rotations, historically speaking, for most people, this is the more complicated one. People generally have more success going to the back plank than to the front plank. So usually when I'm doing this in a classroom full of people, we have spotters, and I say we're going to go front plank, shoulder stand, back plank, and then I say spotters be ready. Some of them aren't going to make it back as we go reverse shoulder stand back to front plank. So some of you are likely not going to make it. So we want to make sure that you have a pretty decent idea of where this is in space, but know that this one generally, when it doesn't come down, when it doesn't land on the feet, it just kind of like fumbles usually between the legs or off to the side. It's not something that tends to be toward the head or anything, vital. I would say all of it is vital, but nothing that is permanent. You like that pork chop? You just want to feed words into my ear right now, don't you? Any questions there? Cool. All right, give it a shot. Ask us questions if you need. 3, 2, 1. Rather than the 2 half rotations that we've just done, we're going to look at the techniques to do full rotations. So full rotations will be that we're going from a front plank to a reverse shoulder stand to a front plank, rather than just half of that. In this, there's going to be a little bit of order of operations of which arm we're putting our weight into first and which arm we're bringing our weight out of last. And those become relatively important as we're going through this. One of the things that we're going to look at is also what angle we're coming into this from. The first one is going to be really steep, and then we'll show some variations that make it a little bit easier. So from this front plank, the first thing that I'm going to do is we have to figure out which way we're rotating. So generally speaking, bases will dictate which way the rotation happens because they're going to feel more confident in one of their arms being able to support this than the other. And so flyers are going to follow that. I'm going to bring an arm up, and my arm is going to be externally rotated, and that's going to be the first shoulder I make contact with because we're going into a reverse shoulder stand. Flyer is going to tuck the chin, and the base is going to go around the back of the head and reach for the inside of the shoulders for the second one. And I'm going to bend my elbows and extend the legs to come into the inversion here. Now we've made our way from a front plank to a reverse shoulder stand. The second half of this is what we've already just done. We're going to continue the rotation to a front plank. We're going to do that this way so that you can see that hand grip even a little bit better. Externally rotate. I make a connection with the pads of my fingers or the tips of my fingers right below the collarbone. And then my wrist bends as the flyer comes down toward it. I reach around. And then the flyers here, you want to think about the second arm that's come in. That's the one that you're going to bring the weight into more. So don't think about the first arm that you made contact with. It's that second arm. You got to come all the way up and over onto it. From there, we'll continue the rotation back to a front plank. And that's probably the thing that tends to be the Achilles for most people, is that we put pressure into the first opportunity that we get. And so we feel that first point of contact come in, and as flyers, we're like, great, I'm on it. But this arm is compromised. It is moving closer to my hip, whereas the other arm, though it's coming across, it is staying over my shoulder line. And so because it's over my shoulder line, if the flyer comes into that, I have a great amount of stability that's going to help keep the flyer in balance in the inversion. So flyers, you think about that second arm coming in,
bases, that's the one that you want to make sure that you're communicating. And I give a little bit of a wiggle that says, this is the one, make sure you focus here. Make sense? Cool. Now for some of us, that's going to be a little bit much. Yeah, Maria, Brandon, got a question?
Yeah, is the second arm the strong arm? Like that's what you were saying, like to figure out which is your strong arm. So is the second one?
The second one is, and that's my right arm, the one that I'm bringing across. That's the one that I feel more confident about. Yeah, yeah. For those of us that feel like, fuck that looks like I'm going to break my head. We want you to do same, but you're going to, rather than coming off both feet at the same time in a plank position, we're just going to have the ability to go into a side star as an intermediate step on the way there. So it's going to look quite similar. We're just going to allow our flyers to go into this side star position and tip into it here. I can even help by pushing the leg into the inversion. This is the one you still want to focus on. Flyers, you're still focusing on that second arm coming in as the one that is going to support you better. So really, flyers, you gotta get yourself nice and across diagonally into that second arm, which will be a phenomenal,
We got a
yeah,
demo.
which will be a phenomenal exercise for all of the side bodies as we're coming into it. Flyers are gonna get plenty of work in your lats, bringing yourself over. We'll take a look at that one more time. It's a great sign. It's like really easy to see. All right, so the first hand comes in. I'm gonna reposition. Second hand comes in, and then flyers, you focus on that second arm. It's the one that's further away from you. There's no weight in it. You gotta get the legs over top of it. You gotta get the hips over top of it. Not our best form, but we got there. Was that clear? Was that illustrative? Yeah? 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 Cool. Any questions? Yeah, Rochelle.
Can you demonstrate the first version, please?
Yeah, I'll demonstrate the first version again. For those of you that want, you can go practice now. For those of you that want to see the demo again, we'll show it again. We'll even do that demo again so that you can see the hands better. Yeah, another one in you? That work for you, Rochelle? Cool. Yes, Maria, Brandon.
Hello, I have a question for the flyer. Are you straddling as you lift off? I found that I had to straddle to get my weight onto that second shoulder. Or are you somehow keeping your legs together in a straight line and still managing to do that?
It's a little bit of both. I would say that legs straddled allows for the base to help with that bottom leg connection to help lift and elevate the hips over the shoulders. But keeping the legs together allows for to find that like extension and rotation in your spine.
So maybe straddle to get into the inversion, and then once you're in the inversion, you can find a little bit more rotation, or a little bit, and you can gauge in yourself to see if your rotation is healthy with the straddle, or if you're feeling limited in your rotation with the straddle. Once you're in the inversion, you can bring your legs together and rotate. But straddling to get into the inversion, just fine. Nothing wrong with it.
Thank you.
So we're having a little bit of difficulty with the placement of the hands on the shoulder. It looks like you had the reverse kind of grip on the shoulder, and I didn't do that and I was fine, but Jen didn't do it, and then she really hurt it. Really hurt the wrist. So can we see that one more time?
Yeah, and this should be a very standard reverse shoulder stand grip. You wanna, yeah, we'll look at it. Let's go from side start, because the grip's gonna be the same either way. And I mean, I repositioned probably 4 times just there. Okay. And so then we're in this position here for reverse shoulder stand. And then that rotates. From there, we're going to take a look at a boomerang. Now, boomerang is a strange transition. It's one of these things that essentially goes from like a side star to star or a front plank to star, and it's cyclical. This one, rather than hitting all 4 points on the shoulders and hips, really just touches one side of the body. So a flyer, you're only being touched on your left shoulder and your left hip, your left shoulder, your left hip, your left shoulder, your left hip, or your right shoulder, right hip, right shoulder, right hip. And so flyers, you're going to be the best guides for the bases to help keep track of where the next landmark is, because bases will sometimes get confused and go to the wrong hip, but flyers, you should just know that you feel the pressure just on one side. And that's a great way to know you're doing the correct one. Basically, if we're in a star, we have the ability to walk down the front of the body, or we have the ability to walk down the back of the body. In the boomerang, we're going to walk down the front of the body, and again, we're going to go from the same side shoulder to the same side hip over and over again. And there's a couple of things that we want you to focus on here. Primarily is not just the receiving leg, but the delivery leg. The one that's connected to the shoulder tends to be forgotten by most bases pretty quickly as soon as we touch a hip. And to do a boomerang really well, we want to keep that shoulder connection the entire time, almost like there's just a slight moment that it comes off the front of the chest to go right back to the shoulder, right? So if the toes are here, we're just kind of taking it off and going right back again. You're going to see that in a second here. Look at how we use that foot to really help make this shape round. I think this way, but we're going to find out. So a flyer is looking to really showcase those hips and give a little bit of a turn. From there, base is going to step to that hip with an internally rotated foot, and this foot that's on the shoulder is nice and soft, but it maintains there. And I use it to bring the shoulder over me. We regrip, and then that foot steps right back to that shoulder again. As we come into the inversion, I step across the front of the body again, and keep connected to the chest to help the rotation back around. This is a huge articulation of the legs. I got one knee that's bending deep, one that's extending all the way, and then same thing again. I'm gonna let my elbows even potentially come to the ground, keep my flyer's arms strong here. I don't want to pin my flyer's arms behind the back. I want their arms to be strong. And so I let my elbows bend as that happens. One more time, watch whatever piece of this you haven't seen yet. There's that moment where we almost felt there's a little bit of instability, and my instinct, which is one that I want us to all cultivate, is I bend that knee, help stabilize again, and then I can extend it again from that point of stability. Cool. Any questions? None?
I think I saw David.
Okay, David, what you got?
Do you have a trick for remembering which way you turn the hands when you switch?
Oh, when we regrip? It really is that you've run out of rotation in one direction, and then you're just going to, you have to regrip at that point. If you don't regrip, you'll go backwards. And if you, go ahead.
More like, how do you know, do you go under or over?
Oh, the new hand regrips over. Yeah. Any other questions?
Kristen Porkchop, you want to see it again?
We'll see it again. By the way, this sign is working great. For those of you that want, you can stay and watch again. For those of you that want to go practice, go ahead and go practice. Don't worry, Janae, nobody saw that. Flyer rotates their hips first. Base bends until we reach the hip. Oh, I let go of that shoulder a little too soon on that one. We'll go one more time. Cool. So pause here. Is that good? Again? We're good. One more time.
Yeah, we're doing it, but it's very unsmooth in the rotation on the landing.
Okay.
Like I'm kind of having trouble rotating around to get forward facing again.
So when you're making connect.
He catches my hip, and then we kind of gotta like.
Gotcha, gotcha. So Chris, one of the things to think about is the foot that's on the shoulder, the one that is not touching the hip, but the other one, what can it do to help rotate your flyer so that when you make a connection with the hip, you have less of that movement to go? Does that make sense? Cool, all right. We'll show it again here. And so what I was saying there was, this foot that's still on the shoulder, I can rotate my flyer with it. I can make it so that it's further away or closer. So I'm going to make it closer. Rotate with it, make that connection, and then the foot on the shoulder helps bring the flyer back over the base of center.
Thanks, Lux. The rotation of the 1 foot in star to get the hip closer made all the difference.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I love it. This is one of the oldest things that I've ever cultivated in this practice. It's one of those ones that, like, from a basic blocking perspective, is not the most complicated thing to do, but it is not easy to do well and smooth. It does take quite a bit of calibration and practice. There's a lot of small pieces that are all moving here. So again, we want it to be so that we have some things that are
Sorry, I was looking at you rather than
some things that are working with relative ease and intuitiveness, and then other things that are going to be at an edge that will need practice beyond the couple of hours that we're spending together in this, you know, classroom. I feel like you're all in my home. So when you go home to your homes outside of my home, you'll have to practice this sometimes. That's the idea. We want it to be something that if you have questions throughout the week as you're working on these things, send a message. We're happy to look over your videos, give you diagnosis, help out whatever things in your acro practice that will help prepare you for the next classes. This is a really phenomenal experience for us. It's pretty great to be able to have this many people that are practicing up and down the West Coast and We got some people all the way from Texas. We have people that are tuning in from Tel Aviv and from New York. We have quite some flexibility with this type of a classroom. So it is really nice to see so many faces that are familiar, a few faces that are new, but from all over in this one place together. Thank you so much for being here. The smiles that are coming down each time you hit the ground are what make it not being able to hear you worth it. So your nonverbal communication that you're projecting back at us looks beautiful. Thank you. For those of you that are fortunate enough to have a spotter, you're my favorites. I love the rest of you, but you're my favorites. Thank your spotters. Yeah, thank your spotters, thank your spotters. For the rest of us, you might have to turn to your couch to thank them. That might be your spotter. But take a moment and thank your bases, thank your flyers, thank your mattresses. But taking that moment to just speak gratitude to the people that we practice with. Thank you so much. We hope to see you all again next week. This class is, for the last 2 weeks now, hitting its capacity. So if you desire to be a part of this class for a lot of people in the Wednesday class are just paying for the entire month so that you don't have to recheck in each week. So please feel encouraged to register for the rest of the month if you want. I have a feeling we're going to be doing this longer than 1 month, but at this point I have it scheduled out through the rest of April. It looks like May. I don't think, at least in Seattle, we're not going to be allowed out until June. I think we're grounded at least until that long. So while we're here grounded, we'll continue to do these classes here. It's possible that we'll even do them into the future beyond that, but we hope that you join us each week here in our little grounded state. And I'm so grateful to see you all. Thank you so much for supporting this and for continuing to cultivate practice even in these times. You're fucking amazing. With that, thank you all. Reach out. Yeah, let us know if you have anything throughout the week.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, guys.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Hi, John.
Thanks, guys. You're awesome.
Welcome.
Hi, John. Love B.
Where are you? Hang on, let me find you.
Track, Love B.